right. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I was told that you have to wait until your walk-up song plays, because otherwise you don't get full advantage of having picked a walk-up song. So I took my time, so appreciate it. As Brittany introduced me, I'm Denise Gotcher. I'm the Director of Creative Solutions and Brand Experience for Vitalant. And I'm going to start out by just telling you a little bit about who we are as an organization so that you get a little bit of framework for what we do. Now, Vitalant supports 900 hospitals serving millions of patients every year. We collect blood from 600,000 volunteer blood donors every day. We have 115 physical donation centers where you can go in and make a blood donation across the country. And we host 60,000 blood drives annually. And I'll get into a little bit of the nuance of what a blood drive is and what that looks like, because it has a lot to do with how we approach our creative. So, in 2022, we really started rolling out our creative processes. We knew that we needed to find ways to get efficient and make it easy for our local teams, our enterprise teams to get their requests into us. We started with workflow with Litho very early on, so yay Litho. At that time, we had a different DAM provider, and a DAM provider they were, because it wasn't great, and I'll get to that a little bit in a second. And in 2021, we kind of reassessed all these tools and asked ourselves, what's not working? What can we do better? We were realizing that the tools we had out there, especially our DAM, had low adoption within the organization, and we really weren't seeing the return on that investment that we were hoping for. So we needed a more robust DAM. We needed systems that worked together, and we needed to be able to get the assets out to our stakeholders as quickly as possible. So in 2024, we transitioned to our Litho DAM. I'll talk a little bit about that transition in a minute, but the idea of moving 5,000 assets in one DAM to another DAM was pretty dang scary when we started out, but we figured out ways to maximize that process, and I'll share a little bit about what that looked like. So now 2024, just a year ago, we have rolled out both Litho for Workflow, Litho for DAM. We transitioned from mainly focusing on supporting our enterprise marketing to becoming a solution for the entire company. So this is our lovely creative team here. There are 5 of us. We support the entire company of 4,000 employees, a small but mighty team. We have 3 full-time graphic designers, and our creative process manager does design kind of half-time, or she's supposed to at least. Sometimes she does quite a bit more than that. And then myself, the creative director, who's sort of steering and having those conversations with our higher-ups about what our creative team is doing. And the type of assets that we were producing really were the full extent of full range email, promotional support, digital advertising, social media, text, calling, web, video production, all over the board. We were essentially a one-stop shop. So 5 people, 4,000 employees trying to recruit 600,000 donors in a year to make sure that the patients who need the blood have the blood when they need it. Okay, so early on, we decided we needed to define what success looked like for our creative processes. And this is what we came up with, how it looked to us. So, a streamlined creative process that empowers our in-house team to focus on the high-impact work while efficiently managing and sharing all of the branded assets and demonstrating measurable value to our higher-ups. That's the end goal. That's a stewarding principle that we're working from. We came up with 5 pillars that were going to support that main goal. The first one, streamlining our production. We needed to have integrated processes. We needed to spend less time communicating about the task. The task shouldn't be talking about the task. It should be getting the task done. So finding a way to streamline that and give visibility for all those involved. And then having the internal and external partners also supported through the same platform. The second one was making our assets accessible to all. Our brand hub, or we call it brand hub internally, but it's essentially the DAM. The DAM needed to be accessible for our frontline employees as much as our CEO to be able to go and find what they need quickly, easily. The third pillar was all about brand consistency. As you can imagine, going from those regional blood center environment to having one brand has been a real struggle. Trying to find ways to keep our brand consistent and help people stay on brand is hard. So we needed this product to be able to help us accomplish that. And the fourth one is all about production metrics. How do we show our value within the organization? And Litho has been awesome in being able to help us do that. Okay, So I'm basically going to break down a lesson we've learned on each of those 4 pillars. Going to get pretty tactical into a lot of details here. So hopefully there'll be some great takeaways that you can take back for your organizations as well. The first one is basically the right tool for the right user. The challenge was, how do we use the Litho tools to meet the needs of so many departments? There's only 5 of us, and we need to, get assets to 4,000 people. So this kind of shows you some of our stakeholders here who are involved in this process. First off is marketing. These are basically like our power users who are in there every day. They're using the DAM. They're even managing brand guides that we use as like portals for different audience sections. I spoke a little bit about blood drives. Blood drives are basically, we bring on a person who's an advocate for an organization, and they are the ones recruiting blood donors, and they're hosting an event at their location. So that's 60,000 little brand advocates out in the world. So we basically use the brand guides as a way to create a curated collection of content for those groups. And we even offloaded the management of those brand guides to our marketing functionality. So they were using all assets of it. They're putting in requests to our team. They are using the brand guides for those special audience areas. And then they are using the Litho DAM to make requests to us and get the assets that they need and make sure that it's all in line with our brand standards. Our next group down here is our regional sales teams. These are our local folks who are out there working with those blood drive coordinators, those advocates, getting more blood drives on the books, helping us to meet our organizational goals. So tempo templates are huge for this group. This is definitely the group who really likes to control their own creative. And as you can imagine, 60,000 tiny special events every day, that requires a lot of customization. Everybody likes to do things a little bit different within their organization. So tempo templates are the way that we allow them to have creative freedom within brand guidelines and still be able to have some control for that. Because literally our team just isn't big enough to support all of those events. So it had to be a way to streamline that. And then the DAM obviously works to sharing shared resources like educational materials, logos, all that kind of stuff. So they're big users in there as well. Our other departments are things like more of our internal functionalities. So things like HR, IT, all of those smaller internal departments who have production needs and are making PowerPoints and things like that. They are mostly living in the DAM for the most part, but they are also utilizing tempo templates, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we use that for this group in a bit. And then the last one, our leadership. Really, they just needed visibility. So they kind of live in our proof review and approval process, where they're getting visibility on the assets, making their comments as needed, but not spending a whole lot of time in the nitty-gritty of the product. And part of what we have done is kind of customize training for these different groups. I've heard a couple people mention like having to meet with individual departments and tailor the training towards them. And that really is helpful because all these groups are using it differently. They're gonna understand it from a little bit different framework. So it's really important to have that personal touch. One of the ways that we have done this too, especially for this workflow group who really is just like the leadership who are in that review and approval place, we have created scribe documents that are just really quick step-by-step features because maybe they go in and review something once or twice a year. They're not gonna remember the process, so having that as a quick, easy reference for them is really, really helpful as well. Okay, so that brings us to our external users. We frequently work with agencies. Some of it, we are primarily, I'd say we're 95% an in-house creative team, but we do have specialized agencies who are working on specific projects for us. So with our agencies, we are doing things like creating collections of contents from the hub and sharing that out with them so that they've got the resources they need in order to easily support us. And we also have a brand guide that's just general brand guidelines to grab logos and things like that. So depending on the needs of that agency, we kind of tailor the content to them. Our content vendors, this group is actually like photographers and videographers. We do not have an in-house team right now for that functionality. So it's important to us to be able to streamline that process. So instead of having photographers and videographers send us a link to a gallery, we're downloading it onto our computer, we're uploading it to BrainHub. We've actually established using upload requests through Litho in order to give them an ability to just send the materials directly to us and take out the middleman, take out that extra step there. And I already kind of addressed these a little bit. Our media partner organizations and social advocates, we have those curated content in brand guides for them so that they can get what they need easy and fast. Oh, and I went totally out of order. Sorry about that. Okay, so that moves us on to our next lesson, which was that second pillar was all about making our assets accessible. In doing that, I mentioned the transition to the DAM. That was tricky. We went from one DAM product to another, and we realized pretty quickly that all of the time and work we had put into tagging assets in the first DAM, none of it transferred over. So 5,000 assets worth of tagging, gone overnight. So we had to figure out a way to manage the process of transitioning to this product without overwhelming our team, because they still had work to do. They were still trying to get all the assets out every day and do the regular work. So we tried to figure out, how would our end users search for this content? So we kind of came up with a couple of guiding principles in how we put this in there. What is the asset? Who's the audience? What can you do with it? And we came up with just like a simple chart of the basic high-level things of areas that these could fall under. And that worked well for, I'd say, 50% of the assets. And then we got to our photo content and video content. Tricky thing about photo and video content is they're all different. There's not a lot of commonalities. There's not a lot of things that you can just bulk tag. It really took like individual tagging to get this in there and make it work well. So we ended up doing is hiring a freelancer to help us with just this one part of the process. We brought them in literally just to tag assets for hours and hours and look through the content we already had. But in order to do that, you have to share your brain with them. So that is when we came up with this. The basics is this image video, what is it of? But we created a structure that kind of answered the questions who, what, when, where, and how. So we came up with a spreadsheet that had all of these things captured to help share our brain or our thought process of all these assets with this freelancer to enable them to help us tag this content. So very complex, as you can tell, lots and lots of nuance there. But it really did work well in helping us transition over. The other interesting nuance between our old DAM and our new DAM is that, as those of you who are in the Litho hub or the Litho DAM right now, it's very tag-oriented, very keyword-centric. Our old DAM was basically like a bunch of folders. You would click on this type of content in that folder, and sometimes it was in multiple folders and things like that. So as we were moving away, there was a lot of fear within the organization that I'm not going to be able to find things if I can't go to the folder where they lived before. So we kind of adopted a structure to meet both of those needs. Obviously, we spent a lot of time tagging and tried to introduce the idea of search and keywording. But we also created tag menus to give that folderized feeling to a lot of the common content there, so that depending on the user, they could search the way that was most meaningful to them. And there was definitely a division within the organization. People fell into one camp or the other. So we needed to find a way to meet the needs for each of those. Okay, our third lesson is brand consistency. Definitely a struggle for us as an organization. With such a small design team, we had to figure out ways to make it possible to maximize our creative impact. So we asked ourselves, with so many needs, what are the repetitive asks that don't require a graphic designer? How can we create some self-service options? And I actually stole this from a Litho event, and I can't remember which one, but the idea of sharing the crayons, giving those creative folks the way to be a part of the creative process, but still stay within brand guidelines at the same time. So we looked for areas where we could maximize that. But the one thing I have to preface with this, and sort of a tactical takeaway here, is that you do have to have realistic expectations of the end product. If you allow your users to have any type of, self-service options, even a beautiful template can get broken really, really fast by, poor image choice, or didn't crop the image well, or too much copy on a page that's meant for a small amount of copy. So it's definitely something that we continue to work through as an organization, but we learned a lot of lessons along the way that have improved. The one thing that we learned the most is that if there's not a template for it, they make their own, and it ain't gonna be pretty. And it's not gonna be brand compliant. So we kind of took the approach of, what can we, at first we were like, well, let's just have a small amount of templates, the most used things. We decided let's just template anything we possibly can. If they're looking for it, let's get a template in there so that they can start to figure out ways to make it on brand. So the areas that we targeted for what we template are simplifying seasonal, regional, and frequently updated items. And these are all things like when the hours change at a center. We've been doing a lot of remodels in our physical locations where they can use, this is the dates we're going to be closed, this is our new hours, things like that. We didn't need to be updating single numbers as a creative team. So looking for ways to maximize that. Another need area that came up a lot was our HR functionalities. They're going out to recruitment events for employees, basically, and they're featuring different job types, and we didn't need to be rewriting descriptions on a single flyer 5 times a month for these different events, depending on what the needs were. So we made a template for it and allowed them to do that and do things like advertise on LinkedIn and things like that. So anything that we could realistically hand off to them with brand oversight, but not with as much us having to be involved in the process. So one of the takeaways we learned from this from a design perspective and designing for templates is you can't make something beautiful and then transition it to a template as easily as you can make a template and make it a template. Like the complexity of the design has to be simple enough that it carries over easily. Because the one thing we found is if we made the layout too complex, there wasn't as much flexibility for the end user, and they'd come back and be like, if I could just move this thing right over there, I would have enough room for all of my copy, kind of thing. So knowing that it's going to be a template going in has been a really good lesson learned from us, as opposed to trying to make it very, very heavily graphic, like giving a little bit more room for customization there. This is one of our very first attempts at using the multiple layouts option in the DAM. And this is basically a recognition program. So as donors go through the process and donate at different levels, they get an award or recognition at different levels, like gold, silver, bronze, emerald, depending on how many donations they've made. And you'll notice the only difference between these is the colors, the name of their donations, and the name of the award. So making this into a template made it very easy for our external teams to just make these for themselves, and not have to come and ask the creative team for it. Before Tempo, we had this template, but there was 18 versions of it. There was 18 different templates where they had to go find the one that was for the award level they were going to address. Now they can just go to one template, use the drop-down to pick the one that they need, and then they'll be able to customize it for their needs. Okay, this is sort of the mecca of all of our templates. So I show this one because it really addresses the needs of those blood drives. So we're talking about those small individual events, tons of customization needed. The tricky thing about them is that we'll have a partnership with a church, for example, and they'll run 4 blood drives a year. So they want something that looks different 4 times throughout the year. So we came up with this complex local event template that has a variety of looks and feels. All the information stays mostly the same for these events. It's time, giveaway, date, that kind of stuff. So they can plug it in once and then choose a look and feel that best represents them or whatever the season is or things of that nature. So from this one template comes all these different looks. It's different enough, it's still on brand. They're not gonna feel like if you hung them side by side, they'd be the exact same piece. So having the ability to have that customization is huge. But another lesson learned here is just how flexible these templates need to be. Whatever you lock down, they will come and ask you if they can change it. So it's important to keep that in mind of how do you balance that boundaries approach to this, but also know that you need to have the flexibility built into it as well. They're gonna need to move things around. So you can't be too married to the design because it will get changed a little bit depending on their needs. The other thing about this is that the staff training for these type of things were really a must. There was things that just weren't obvious to people that us as designers, we sort of look at it and we're like, oh yeah, totally, you'd move this around, you would recrop this image. That didn't come naturally to these one-off stakeholders who were kind of using this every once in a while, a few times a year. So we had to really invest in training for the audiences that most use these templates so that they could kind of navigate some of those things that were less obvious, we create a lot of video tutorials and trainings for high-use groups so that they can refer to it afterwards, or if things missed, think people miss the training or things like that. So super important to keep that in mind. And the final piece, I feel like almost everyone up here on stage has mentioned this today, is the metrics. Like defining the metrics that matter to prove your worth to the organization. And there's a couple of things that we use weekly that all come from the Litho Insights dashboards and from the actual reporting. We definitely live in a very Excel world that is very fast-paced, that is very numbers-driven, because we're all about those blood goals. If you don't have the right amount of blood on the shelves, there's, the potential patients don't have what they need. So it's very, very numbers-driven. And because of that, we found ways to use the data from Litho and kind of put that in an Excel format so it looks similar to the reports that we were already using. This weekly triage report is one that our creative operations manager puts out once a week. And it basically shows, last week how many resources we're using, how over-resourced we were. And one interesting note in here is that we really live in a world of level of effort, LOE. We group tasks together that are similar and make a guess at how long they take, and then the designer is responsible for tweaking that LOE if it turns out that it took less time or less time. So we have those baselines set in, and that's how we let our teams know, you'll see the over-under on this report here is in red, because that meant that last week we had 40 more hours of LOE requested than what we could accommodate based off of our staff. And we use these numbers also to kind of highlight pain points. I know the last group talked a lot about rush requests. We highlight our rush requests and our rework requests, because we had a lot of issues at the beginning where stuff would be closed out in Litho, asset approved, and another stakeholder would come in on the back end and decide, I don't like that, let's change it up. So we had to reopen tasks and create more work around that task. So we started capturing that as a pain point as well. And we do use tags to identify these areas for sure. And the other thing that we were capturing too is as we have increased to support more areas of the organization, we wanted to be able to showcase that to our higher ups, like, hey, we're spending this many hours on this project. If we're gonna continue to do that, we need to have more staff to support this area. Or if you wanna bring in more work for our team, this is what it's gonna mean. We're gonna need more staff to support that. This is our annual production report that basically shows, and I'm curious, like number of hands in the room, who has asked for additional staff? And the question back was, can AI do that? Like, that's definitely been the vibe for a while in our organization. So one of the ways that we were showing how much we were utilizing AI is this first one at the top here that shows that from year to year, we have increased the amount of tasks, but decreased the amount of LOE. So we were doing way more tasks in less amount of time. And AI is one of the ways that we have been able to do that and utilize that efficiency wherever we can. This other piece here just kind of shows how we are prioritizing our tasks, what our team is spending time on, and being able to have the discussion with leadership of, does this align with our mission as an organization? And saying, if you want to spend more time in this, we're gonna need that. And I'm just gonna share a big win, because we just recently used this data like a week ago to get approval for 2 more staff on our team. So super excited to be able to join the ranks of people who have used Litho data to justify more staff. So very excited. It all really comes back to those 5 pillars though. I kind of put on this final slide how each of these pillars ties back to one of these small tactical lessons learned and how we are using that in the organization to really optimize that creative production. I could go on and on about all these things forever. This is like such a passion of mine. So if you have any thoughts or questions on how we have done any of this, please, would love to hear from you. So thank you very much.
That was so great. And we can just advance it one more time and we'll get to Q&A. I just want to say personally, my father has been given blood every chance he can since he was 22 years old. Awesome. And has now donated over 50 gallons.
That's so great.
Just an amazing practice to put into place if you want to give back, always in need. And I love that. And I love that you're supporting this mission with incredible creative, because the content engine powers incredible things. So let's get into some of these questions. What metrics do you, oh, okay,
it's changing.
It's changing. Okay, we're gonna pick one. What reviews do the template exports go through? How do volunteer orgs get feedback you require them to make, or do you just let it go?
So it's a little scary, but we had to acknowledge when we started using Tempo templates that we could not review them all. 60,000 tiny events a year, there's no way that we can look at all of that work. So you just kind of have to cross your fingers and say, how high of an investment, how many eyes are going to be on this, and decide whether or not it needs creative review. So there really isn't a review process for those templates. We rely on our staff, who are mostly the ones customizing them. We rely on those staff to be sure that they are doing the right thing and know that most likely it's not going to be on our CEO's desk if it's just for like a one-day blood drive in Utah or whatnot. So,
yeah, I love that. Prioritize what matters and care about what matters. How do you approach setting LOE? Lots of questions about LOE here. And I know you guys are using it really successfully. And what report or insight in Litho are you using in particular to pull these metrics?
So this is a little bit of a tricky one. I feel like most of the Litho reports are more geared towards projects or tasks. So it is a little bit hard to measure LOE. On the new task dashboard, there is like a section at the bottom that measures LOE. So that's one place that we've used. But also, we just make our custom reports and have the LOE for each of the tasks correspond to the task and use Excel to pull the data ourselves. But it's on our wish list. And Hannah, I know you've heard from us lots of times about how much we would like to get more reporting for LOE. So, and as far as like how we establish what the LOE is, we basically have templates for most things. Like we assume that a print piece is going to take this many hours. We assume that an email is going to take this many hours. And we build that into the intake process. As a request comes in Litho, my process manager, Brenda, sees it first. She assigns the LOE based off of what it is and reads the description ahead of time. And then if it turns out to be more or less, that's where we rely on our design team in order to make those adjustments.
What's been the most effective way that you've driven adoption of this new ecosystem across that distributed org?
It's tricky. Honestly, I feel like this is an area where we have had great success in some areas and not as much success in others. Doing those trainings that are really targeted to a particular group and how they will use it has been the most successful thing. We did kind of a broad rollout of the process when we first launched these tools, and it was kind of mixed results. We really had to follow up with specific training for specific areas and how they were going to use the processes. So it's a tricky one that we're always working on.
Yeah, I think someone mentioned this, and I think in the PIN session, they were talking, always be learning. It's always changing. As soon as you master the tool, something in your organization changes. And earlier in the sports panel, Cato mentioned, they're a year and a half into using Litho, and they still feel like they're in onboarding. And I think that's actually a common feeling that everybody shares, right? You're always onboarding into some kind of a new trick, tip, something that you've learned from another customer, something that you learned from your customer success manager. And that shouldn't be a bad feeling. I think that should be, embrace that feeling that there can always be improvement. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's good enough, or maybe you can make it better. And picking and prioritizing the things that you care about can really make all the difference.
Yeah.
So let's end on one last question. And I think the last three questions are really tied into that latest achievement that you just shared about getting approval for 2 more creative resources, which is huge. So tell us a little bit about what that conversation was like and the particular data points that made a difference.
The data points that really made a difference for us was comparing year over year LOE. Saying, okay, this is how many hours we spent in 2024. This is where we're at 6 months into 2025. And we had increased by 25% with the same amount of staff. It was actually very easy with those data points to be able to justify the need for more people. So those were definitely the top ones. The other one was just sort of that list of priorities, showcasing them how we're spending our time and saying, if you would like to grow, if you want to better support this area of the organization, we're gonna need more hours to do that because we're already maxed out on what we're supporting currently. So those were really the 2 big pieces. And I know there's been a lot of questions about we have struggled a little bit with how to showcase what our team is spending time on. We lean into tags because many of our team members who are making requests have many different focus areas, the classic nonprofit wear all the hats. So it was really hard to showcase that just by who's making the request or even a department drop down. We needed to really dial it down by individual tasks. So we do go through the effort of tagging the requests so that we can justify, this much time was spent for the platelet program, this much time was spent for this type of recruitment and things of that nature. Which tags are not always the easiest thing to capture in reporting, but you can get the raw data out and then do what you need to massage that into the story that you want to tell.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Denise.